I'm currently director at the European Commission's International Cooperation and Development Department, in charge of part of Africa, Eastern Africa, Southern Africa, the Indian Ocean, and relations with the African Union. On top of that, I'm also head of the task force for the negotiation of a new framework partnership with the countries of Africa, the Caribbean and the Pacific, and the ACP group, the current Cotonou agreement, which we have. In a previous life, before taking up this job here, I've been for 5 years the head of the spokespersons of the European Commission during the second mandate of President Barroso. And before that, I was Chief of Staff of Louis Michel, now MEP, in those days the Commissioner for Development Cooperation. And it's in those days, I must say, that we've worked very intensively and very closely with Ethiopia, and that I've had the occasion of meeting several times, I must say, Prime Minister Meles. It's never easy to make a snapshot of a relationship, because a relationship by definition is a movie, not a picture. So it goes through continuous changes with its ups and downs. But I think that looking at the relationship between the EU and Ethiopia, and if you look at it, let's say, from a longer term perspective, looking back and looking forward towards a point on the horizon, I think it is obvious that this has been and will remain a very strategic relationship. I think it suffices to look at the map of the region to say that and to see that Ethiopia is not exactly placed in the most, let's say, stable part of the world. You have Somalia as a neighboring country, which is now getting better, but which for a long time has gone through very unstable times. You have South Sudan next door, which is currently going through particularly difficult times. So for Europe, I think Ethiopia has always been a very reliable, a very stable partner in a difficult region with which we could work, with which we can build a political relationship that precisely allows us to work for stability and for prosperity in the Horn of Africa. I think that let's say, that intent and that reality, which has been the case over many years, has been more formally recognized, I would say, this year through precisely the signature between the EU and Ethiopia of what we call the strategic engagement, covering 6 big areas of engagement where we will work together to make sure that that we get the best of our relationship.
Of Ethiopia.
As always, ultimately, it is about guaranteeing prosperity. I think this is ultimately what people in Europe strive for. It is what people in Ethiopia strive for, and it is not always easy to reach. The 6 pillars of the strategic engagement try to capture, I think, what are essential building blocks or stepping stones for that. It is about how we can work together to ensure peace and stability in the region, in the Horn of Africa. Ethiopia, it is recognized, let's say, has a capacity to project itself as a regional power for stability of the Horn beyond its borders. If you look at the incredible contribution, including sacrifices, Ethiopia has made to stabilize Somalia, it is just one example. So I think a partnership on regional stability, regional peace and security is obvious, one of the crucial elements. Secondly, it's of course also about economic growth, about jobs, about attracting investment. This is, I think, where Ethiopia has challenges ahead of itself. I think that some of the recent events clearly demonstrate that. You are not the only ones who are facing these challenges. I think that many countries in the world are facing it. What we would like from this partnership is precisely to support you in making the reforms that are necessary, in gathering let's say, the accompanying measures that are necessary to make the country attractive for investment, which should lead to productivity, to the production in Ethiopia, and hence to what is ultimately the most crucial, to job creation. Let me give you an example. The Prime Minister has in New York this year announced or made publicity for one of his flagship programs, the industrial parks. This is something we are actively looking at supporting. Another example, you know that we have a long history of cooperating with Ethiopia on the development of road infrastructure, which we initially did through projects, which we then moved to budget support. And I think we can be very proud of what we've done together in that area. And we are definitely proud of the support we have given to Ethiopia to what ultimately has been the development of a network of roads that do not only link the big cities, but that really dovetail into even remote areas. The same is true for a number of other areas where we are active, and that ultimately push in various ways and through different means the development of prosperity. Well, it's no secret that it's been, let's say, not exactly a pleasant period. It's not been pleasant for Ethiopia. It has not been extremely comfortable for Europe either. What we are mainly, let's say, looking at or comforted about is the speech which Prime Minister Haile Mariam has made before Parliament, and where we clearly see a very sound analysis of the situation, as well as what we think are the right ideas to address the root causes of the unrest which the country has known, both in terms of economic inclusiveness and in terms of political inclusiveness. Now, we all know that between making an analysis and formulating a response, and subsequently implementing reforms, that there is a difference. I mean, I'm Belgian myself. I know the difficulties my country has gone through and from time to time goes through to make certain reforms happen. So what we are hoping to see is that indeed the president's the Prime Minister's announced reforms will indeed be implemented, and of course, as European Union, we are absolutely ready, and I think I can say we are even keen on providing you the support to make those reforms and those changes happen. Well, migration, it's one of the big topics of our times. I mean, let's say that it's always been there, and then I think it's normal that in an age of globalization, it's not just goods that move, it's also ideas that move, it's also people that move, and so there are a lot of benefits that come with it. But as always, with benefits also come certain challenges. This goes way beyond the relationship between the EU and Ethiopia, of course. I think that the starting point for us in our engagement with the African continent is the Valletta Summit. I think that the Valletta Summit was an extremely useful one, providing us with clear reference points on, let's say, the 5 pillars on which to work to have a balanced and correct way forward on how we progress on handling migration and mobility in all its aspects, both the ones that should allow us to seize the benefits, and the ones like tackling smuggling, trafficking, that allows us to clamp down on the negative aspects of it. So Valletta was the starting point. With Ethiopia, we have a CAM, a common agenda for migration and mobility, and migration and mobility is also one of the 6 pillars of our bilateral strategic engagement. I think, and finally, I shouldn't forget that, within the Horn, I mean, Ethiopia is the only country with which we are working on a compact. So under the partnership framework, we have 5 countries in Africa, 4 in West Africa and the Sahel, and 1 in the Horn, Ethiopia. I must say, I think that on a number of issues we're making good progress. One on which we really hope to see progress, again in terms of implementation soon, is on the issue of return and readmission. I think that under the EU Trust Fund, which is the, let's say, the instrument which we have set up more specifically to help both parties address some of the root causes of migration, there we've made significant progress. Quite a lot of projects have been financed, committed and contracted in Ethiopia, tackling root causes of migration, resilience, helping your country, which is one of the main hosts of refugees and IDPs, to deal with that challenge through RDPPs, regional development and protection programs. So we've made, with the amounts available under the Trust Fund, significant progress, I think, in helping you and helping ourselves address some of the main challenges. One of them being the support we give under the Khartoum process to deal precisely or to tackle the challenge of smuggling and trafficking. There's one still outstanding part, as I said, on which we would like to see a bit more progress, and that's return and readmission. We had a mission earlier in the autumn, in October, to discuss with the Ethiopian authorities on a system of, let's say, clearing, vetting, a list of Ethiopians who are in Europe, and to put in place a system that allows us to identify whether indeed these are Ethiopians or not. I think we've agreed on a framework to handle those cases. We are now looking forward to see indeed progress on the individual files. I know that progress has been made on a number of them. There are still some which require more work, and then we would like to see indeed some of those people returning actually to Ethiopia. Indeed, I mean, it is a process of cooperation, which requires also not just to look at the return and readmission, but also the reintegration angle of it, which is part very much of what we're looking at. By the way, the EU is funding the reintegration of returnees, not from Europe, but from Saudi Arabia, who were some years ago expulsed, are back, and we are funding. I visited the project. We are funding the reintegration of those Ethiopians, which I think was a very good experience with the ILO of reintegration, which will be useful for the future work we're doing. Under the Trust Fund, by the way, in the operational committee we had last week, we just adopted a decision to finance a reintegration facility for the region, which will cover Ethiopia as well, precisely to look at some of those things. We've always looked at the trust fund as a means that should do something different from what we do under our normal cooperation, be it national, be it regional. And the additionality, the added value precisely is by looking at the regional dynamics of it. As you rightly say, and as I said before, if you look at the Horn and the issue of migration, mobility, one thing is very striking, which is Ethiopia was until recently the #1 country in terms of hosting refugees. You have now been slightly overtaken by Uganda, which is hosting a lot of South Sudanese, but so you're still #2 after Uganda. The world's biggest refugee camp is in Kenya, Dadaab. So you can see how countries in the Horn themselves are making a major effort to host refugees from Somalia, from Eritrea, and so on. Which means that a regional approach, whereby we look at this, and whereby we use the trust fund to support, as I said, RDPPs, regional development and protection programs, really brings an added value. Another example, which I mentioned before, the support under the Khartoum process to this project BMM, Better Migration Management, where we bring the different countries of the Khartoum process together, and we see how we can support their joined up, not their individual, but their joined up efforts to tackle the business model of smugglers and traffickers. We adopted recently again a package of measures, almost 65 million euros, to address, let's say, the challenges faced by cross-border communities. Why? Because even if there's a border between them, there's a reality which goes over the border. On the Kenyan side, on the Ethiopian side, people in, let's say, living in challenging situations, fragile situations. So with the trust fund, we fund these cross-border packages, which were, by the way, a priority both for Prime Minister Haile Mariam and for his Kenyan counterpart, Uhuru Kenyatta. So this gives you a good idea of what we want to do under the trust fund. Again, I refer to the compacts and the industrial parks. It's a good example where we would like, since the Prime Minister has very clearly said that the industrial parks are not only destined to create, through investment, jobs for Ethiopians, but that he would also open up some of these jobs for the refugees you are hosting. Again, we are looking under the trust fund to finance support to those industrial parks. We are doing that with the EIB, the European Investment Bank, who could provide a loan. We would use trust fund money to blend it with, and that would then be packaged as a substantial support for the industrial parks. So that's how the trust fund functions. Very much working with our delegations on the ground, with our member states in the capitals, who talk to, of course, the authorities, and then designing projects which are slightly different, I would say, from what we normally would do just under a national indicative program, precisely because we look at these regional dynamics. I think this will probably be one of the most ambitious negotiations which we have ahead of us. Why? Because the current agreement, the current treaty, the Cotonou agreement, which is the legal basis for our relations between the European Union and its partners in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, it was negotiated in the 1990s. previous century, entered into force into 2000. So obviously, between the time when we negotiated that treaty and today, a lot has changed. A lot has changed in Europe. A lot has changed in the world of the ACP countries. And a lot has changed in the outside world, with new players coming on stream and so on. What we are looking at mainly is to really adapt that partnership to the challenges of the future. We have just all agreed in New York a new Agenda 2030 with its Sustainable Development Goals. We had agreed previously in July the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which looks at means of implementation. I think that what we need to do now is to negotiate a new partnership framework that responds to those new challenges, to those new realities, and to some of the answers which Agenda 2030 and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda have brought forward. If I look historically at the relationship, we can see how from Yaoundé over Lomé to Cotonou, the relationship has gradually grown from what was naturally, I would say, a relationship between a donor and the recipient, so very much a development relationship, towards what I think is today a much more mature relationship between equal partners. What we would like to see, I think, for the next step is to take precisely that one step further. So to create a real political partnership between the EU and its partners in Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific. One of the big issues there is, of course, the group itself, the ACP group itself. We have seen how, over the past 10 years, we have developed, in parallel to our relation with the ACP group, we have developed a strategy with Africa, a strategy with the Caribbean, and a strategic engagement with the Pacific. So the new framework will definitely have to recognize, have to translate, more than is the case now in Cotonou, these regional pillars, these regional components. And that's very much the way in which we have presented our initial ideas, which the Commission has adopted in November of this year, which is to create a roof, or, if you want, a foundation where we set out the joint commitments, the joint principles we subscribe to, political values, and so on, human development, migration, etc. And on that foundation, we then build 3 houses. One with Africa, one with the Caribbean, one with the Pacific. So we keep the group together, we keep an engagement with the group, whilst at the same time allowing us to deepen more and to take into account the specificities of our engagement with each of the regions, because the priorities may be slightly different for each of these partnerships of what we expect from our partners and what our partners expect from us. So it would allow us to tailor-make it according to the regions, while at the same time keeping the group together. Why is this keeping the group together important? For 2 reasons. First of all, because that's also what our partners want. I've seen what the summit in Port Moresby has decided. We have spoken with our ACP partners, and there is a clear intention to strengthen, let's say, the cohesion of the group and see whether it can evolve even more than is the case now into a real interest group, not just to define itself vis-à-vis the EU, but also for vis-à-vis other partners in the world. Secondly, because we have seen that there is an unexploited potential in this relationship between the EU and the ACP when it comes to joining forces to weigh influence the global agenda. I think the best example of this was the COP21 in Paris, when it was at a crucial point in time in the negotiations where the ACP and your weight of, 79 countries with the EU and its members joined up and made a declaration that pointed into a certain direction and that really swung the momentum of the negotiations. I think there are quite a number of topics on the international agenda, on the global agenda, where basically the EU and its ACP partners see eye to eye, where our interests on what we would like to see happen converge. And I think we have an interest through this future partnership to encapsulate that and maybe act more on the international scene as precisely this this group of a quite sizable number of countries that if together the partnership weighs on things, we should be listened to.